Why are we here? We're here because FuelEU Maritime, as you know, took effect from the 1st of January 2025. We, with all of these webinars, look to do what we can to support our members. And I saw this platform from BetterSea, and I thought it was quite an interesting product. So we started negotiating on a collaboration between NorthStandard and BetterSea. And that then led to this collaboration where we are now with BetterSea, which gives huge discounts. And Katie, would you just be able to stick into the chat, please, the link to the press release on this, if any of our members wishing to look at that throughout the course of this webinar or afterwards are able to look at it, then it gives them some more information on that. First and foremost, we've got a panel here. I'm going to just introduce myself and then allow Helen, Maximilian and Gordana to introduce themselves. That's sometimes the best way for everybody to give the best introduction. So my name's Mark Smith. Many of you will be familiar with myself from the previous webinars. I'm a loss prevention director in Nordic and Northern Europe and decarbonisation. And I'm here today to present this webinar to you, and so you get a little bit of a more understanding of the FuelEU Maritime and this potential collaboration. So I'm then going to hand over to Helen now, and then the rest of the panel. Thank you, Helen.
Thanks, Mark, and good morning, everybody. My name's Helen Barden. I'm a director in the External Affairs team at NorthStandard. Like Mark, you'll be probably quite familiar with me from the webinars that we run for members and brokers. I've got the easier job today, actually. I'm sort of on hand for any contractual questions that might come up in the Q&A later. So I'll pass on to Maximilian. Thank you.
Thank you both, and hi to all. My name is Max, and we are very happy to be here and collaborate with NorthStandard. I'm the co-CEO of BetterSea, and we will show you our platform today and how you can utilize it for FuelEU compliance. Thank you.
On my side, I am Gordana, and I am the second co-founder of BetterSea. Previously, I was head of Decarbonisation Innovation Portfolio at Maersk, and my background is environmental chemistry and sustainability management. I have a PhD in this space, and I'm going to support you in the chat likely with some of your questions. Hope you have a great event.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. That's great. So on to the first slide now, and I'm sorry for those of you who've seen this before. It's very basic, but some of you may not be familiar with this, so we're very quickly going to canter through. When we talk about the FuelEU Maritime, we're talking about the complete supply chain from well to wake, which is effectively from the start of the process here all the way through until the ship propels itself through the water and creates a wake. If we look at other elements of the FuelEU Maritime, the EU policies, then it's the tank to wake which is concentrated on, which is just this very small part of the proportions. And as you can see here, if you have solar, wind, or other carbon neutral technologies, that is going to have an impact on your well to wake calculations. So just looking at that here, this is the formula, very simplified here on the bottom. It looks more complicated than it is. I'm sure Maximilian and Gordana are very familiar with this formula. I've used it a few times myself. It's not actually as complicated as it looks, but it's the slides here potentially for anybody watching the webinar afterwards and wanting to know a little bit more about the formulas. So let's look at what Fit for 55 is and how the FuelEU Maritime falls within that. So if you want to remember Fit for 55, EU policies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030 compared to 1990. And remember, that's with expanding fleet sizes as well. So it's more of a challenge than you'd think. What's the difference between the EU ETS and the FuelEU Maritime? Because it is quite confusing. They're both regional, they're both applied by the EU, but the EU ETS is an extension of emission trading scheme that's been around for years to the maritime industry. It's a polluters pays principle, and it promotes energy savings, efficiency, and energy transition. It's an emission factor from tank to wake, and it promotes the use of renewable and low carbon fuels for the FuelEU Maritime. It also addresses fuel technology and it looks at it from well to wake. So that's the whole picture, what we were looking at before. And the FuelEU Maritime concentrates on GHG intensity, the energy you're going to get from that fuel, as opposed to some of the other technology and efficiency improvements that we see used on vessels nowadays. So when we look at this picture here very quickly, you can see all of the green technologies are favorable under FuelEU Maritime. So that's including auxiliary power units, low carbon fuel or hydrogen fuel cells, advanced multi-fuel engines and fuel cells. I can see that IT Alco has a hand raised. If you've got any questions, please could you stick them into the chat and then we'll try and answer them as best as we can. Thank you, that would be appreciated. Then we've got the kite sail system, the rig sail system, and solar system, as well as renewable and low carbon fuels. And then we've also touched on main engines, advanced engines, as well as onshore power supply, which we're going to see a lot more of as we enter the next phase. And we've already done a webinar on wind power and the benefits on that and the wind reward factor for the FuelEU Maritime. So that's something we've already discussed. Very quickly now, I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but we're going to talk about the trajectory and the reduction targets effectively in place. So as you can see here on the top, the 2025 reduction target of the GHG intensity is only -2%. And that very quickly increases to between 2030 all the way to 2050, where it's an 80% reduction. So we're just at the start of this now. So we're going to see a huge increase in the reduction targets, and that is going to make it harder and harder for ship owners to comply. And that's what we're going to talk about today, what can be done to help comply. So onto the calculations now. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. The slides are there for reference later on because we do get a lot of questions from our members about the calculations. These are real world calculations based off EU MRV data. And this calculation here is looking at the real cost of FuelEU Maritime. So we have a 19,000 TEU container ship in this example. The fuel consumed within EU that's relevant or as relevant to the FuelEU Maritime calculation is 28,500 tons. You know, bearing in mind most cars weigh around the 2 ton, 1.5 to 2 ton mark. That shows you the sheer volume of emissions we're dealing with here. And that then becomes the equivalent of 105,896 tons of CO2. There's various other factors going to the equation there, including GHG intensity and target intensity. And once you put this all through the calculation, you will come out with a compliance balance here, which I'm circling for those that are watching the webinar live. This then equates to a compliance penalty and a pooling cost effectively. And I'm going to allow Maximilian and Gordana to elaborate on that in more detail, but effectively you would need to pay a compliance penalty to the EU if you were going to continue to use a fossil fuel effectively. So if you continue to use a fossil fuel, these are the sort of figures which you'd be looking at for a 19,000 TEU container ship. And what we've done here is we've then looked at a fleet of vessels. So if you didn't just own a container ship, you also owned an oil tanker and a cruise ship. And we've kept the figures roughly the same. You can see it's a 20,000 TEU container ship and a 300,000 deadweight tanker plus 150,000 GT cruise ship. So effectively, as we spoke about in the last slide, you're building up a deficit here because you're continuing to use a fossil fuel. And that means you will have a compliance balance like the figures shown on the bottom here. So all these figures then add up. And what then happens is if you had a company with all three of these ships in like this, you would then have a combined compliance deficit of 4.95 million euros. And that's why we've got the credit card here to show it's a deficit. It's not a surplus, it's a deficit. So that company is going to be in the unfortunate position that they could pay the compliance penalty, or they could look at the cheaper option of pooling. And that's something that Maximilian and Gordana are going to talk about in more detail later. Then on the flip side of this, you may have another shipping company. This is a completely different shipping company. There's no relation to the shipping company we spoke about before, but they're using, as you can see on the left-hand side here, they're using biofuels, and one of their other ships is using LNG. And because these are not fossil fuels and they're recognized positively by the EU and therefore positively towards the FuelEU Maritime calculations, they build up a compliance surplus of 12.9 million euros. So when we go back to the last slide, we had a deficit of 4.95 million with company A. We've now got a compliance surplus for company B. So what that means effectively is then there needs to be some form of financial exchange between the two companies, as we show here. And that's where it gets quite complicated. So why did we then approach BetterSea? Well, as I said before, we saw their platform. We liked the look of what it was doing. We liked how it made things simpler and more easy for the external, our members to work on this. So we negotiated some discounts, and we can't give you every facet of information from this. But what we can say is that if you've got a 20,000 TEU container ship, your compliance penalty is going to be 1.8 million euros. And the discount you would get as a NorthStandard member per ship is about 44,880 euros. And that's using the BetterSea platform. And if it was an oil tanker, we're looking at a 20,900 euro discount per oil tanker. And then a 56,100 euro saved amount if it was a cruise ship. And this will only last for 6 months unless I can persuade BetterSea to give us longer than that. But I think that's going to be quite a hard task to persuade them. So with that, I'm going to say thank you for your time. I'm going to hand over to Maximilian and Gordana, and they're going to quickly give you a few slides on what their product is about, and then give you a live demonstration of the platform, because we often find that's the best way to get a full grasp and understanding. So thank you very much, Maximilian. Over to you, and I'm going to switch my camera off now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark. Yes, you have very hardly negotiated the offer that we can provide to NorthStandard members. And I'll talk a bit about what you will get from this offer. So now what Mark just outlined actually sounded quite simple and straightforward, this pooling. And some of you may have already received some of the pooling offers. But as so often, the devil is actually in the details. You may also already have received some of the, or experienced some of the headaches. So for example, charter party alignment, or trying to assess whether a pooling offer that you have received is actually priced competitively. But that in fact is only the honeymoon phase. Because imagine you have committed to a pooling agreement without having direct access to your partner's data. And then next year in March, you end up with a pool that collapses, and you don't have any way around it, but only 1 month left until the final pool submission. Wouldn't it be great to have a way to fully process the whole pooling and to figure out how to go about finding the right compliance option, as well as mitigating the risk that it relates to it? Well, that's exactly why I'm here today, to show you that there is a way to mitigate all these concerns. And BetterSea's platform provides you with a seamless and streamlined process around FuelEU pooling, and it comes with a complete legal and financial framework around it, which basically means that you are able to track and simulate your compliance and your pools, that you are able to align charter parties and pooling rights, that you are able to pool internally and externally. You can even invite your friend to join a pool, And on top of that, you can also pool externally if you feel adventurous and find your pooling partner there. Now, our aim was to provide you with a single FuelEU compliance and pooling platform that helps you turn a complex regulation into a single, simple, and streamlined process that allows you to use all of the compliance options available, as well as gives you all the tools to handle the potential risk that may emerge. All the way from pool data integration to pool verification. We have already connected with 6 classification societies, and 5,000 ships trust us with their FuelEU compliance. And honestly speaking, with Mark's NorthStandard exclusive offer, joining this is an absolute no-brainer.